The biggest limits in your life are not the ones imposed by reality. They are the ones your mind quietly decides in advance. Long before you try something, long before you explore what's possible, your brain makes a quick judgment. That's not for me. That won't work. That's unrealistic. And the moment that judgment forms, your mind stops looking for ways forward. You see someone building something impressive, a skill, a business, a career, a life that looks completely different from yours, and almost instantly a thought appears. That kind of thing only works for certain people. Maybe they had better opportunities, better timing, better connections, better circumstances. These explanations feel logical, even reasonable, but what most people don't notice is what happens next. Your mind quietly closes the door, not just on that specific opportunity, but on the entire category of possibility. Most people believe their limits come from external factors: money, education, location, timing. And while those things can influence outcomes, they rarely explain the full picture. Because if you look closely, there are always examples of people who started with similar circumstances and still built something different, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. The real limitation may not be the environment, it may be the interpretation of the environment, the story the mind tells about what's possible. The brain has a natural preference for certainty. Uncertainty requires energy. It forces the mind to evaluate possibilities, consider risks, explore unfamiliar territory. So the brain tries to simplify the world as quickly as possible. It creates categories, rules, assumptions about how life works. This process is useful for everyday decisions, but it becomes dangerous when those assumptions begin defining what you believe is possible for your own life. Because once the mind concludes something is unrealistic, it stops investigating it. This is the quiet moment where many lives become smaller than they could be. Not because someone failed, but because they never fully explored the possibility in the first place. The mind reached a conclusion too early, and once that conclusion exists, it becomes invisible. You stop questioning it, you stop testing it. It simply becomes part of how you see the world. Over time, this mental conclusion begins shaping behavior. You avoid opportunities that challenge the assumption. You focus only on paths that feel familiar. You choose goals that match the limits you already believe in, and the environment quietly confirms the belief. Because when you never test the boundary, it always appears real. The mind interprets this lack of experimentation as proof. See, that life was never possible anyway. The uncomfortable truth is that many people are not limited by ability. They are limited by conclusions they formed years earlier. Conclusions about who they are, what they can achieve, where they belong. Those conclusions feel objective, but they are often just old assumptions that were never challenged. And the longer those assumptions remain untested, the more permanent they feel. The people who build unusual lives tend to share a simple habit. They delay conclusions. Instead of immediately deciding something is unrealistic, they stay curious longer, they experiment, they test boundaries. They gather real feedback from reality instead of relying on early assumptions. Sometimes the assumptions turns out to be correct, but often it doesn't, and that discovery changes everything. So your mind is constantly trying to simplify the world. It wants quick answers, clear limits, predictable outcomes. But meaningful growth rarely begins with certainty. It begins with questioning the conclusions your brain formed too quickly. Not every assumption needs to be accepted. Some of them were just guesses your mind made to feel safe. The thinking pattern that quietly limits your life is not obvious. It doesn't feel like fear. It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like logic, a reasonable explanation for why certain parts are not meant for you. But the moment you start questioning those explanations, something interesting happens. The limits begin to look less like reality and more like conclusions your mind made too soon.